Money FM 89.3. Best of breakfast. Climate Connections.
Welcome to Climate Connections. We've long heard about how forests absorb 1/3 of the carbon dioxide that we humans produce. The carbon in CO2 gas is converted into plant biomass and eventually locked up in tree trunks and forest soils. But they don't do this alone. Trees form partnerships with many different root fungi. Based on research by Boston University's Associate Professor of Biology, Jennifer Bhatnagar, mycorrhizal fungi, a group of network-forming soil fungi that exist entirely underground, growing symbiotically with the roots of trees, is in fact doing us a huge climate favor behind the scenes.
The way that it helps is in two ways, I would say. First, it helps trees and other plants grow. And so about 90% of plant families on Earth associate with mycorrhizal fungi. They actually cannot live in the world where they do without these fungi on their roots to help them get nitrogen, phosphorus, and other elements. These plants need these fungi to give them these elements so they can do photosynthesis. Photosynthesis requires a lot of nitrogen and a lot of phosphorus and other elements. And so if they don't have these fungi, these plants grow very, very poorly. So the first way that these fungi help absorb CO2 in the atmosphere is by promoting plant photosynthesis. So the plant can take in the CO2 and turn it into sugar and other types of biomass. The second way that these fungi help remove CO2 from the atmosphere is that they can actually store a lot of carbon in their own biomass and soil. So remember I mentioned they take sugars from the plant and they use that to build biomass. Well, the biomass of many of these fungi is quite resistant to decay. So the carbon that gets put into their cells can be stable for thousands of years in soil, depending on the species that are living there. And so by kind of helping plants photosynthesize more and then kind of drawing down plant carbon into their own biomass in soil, they can stabilize a lot of carbon in the biosphere.
In layman terms, they're essentially decomposers in disguise. But what actually drew Jennifer to studying mycorrhizal fungi, some of which are only visible under the microscope?
Well, my background is in chemistry. And so when I was a student, a college student, I was very interested in the chemistry of ecosystems, how elements and energy move through ecosystems and what controls it. I started studying plants because they photosynthesize, they draw a lot of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and they turn it into sugar that fuels the rest of life on Earth. But I learned very quickly that fungi actually control the next step of the movement of carbon through the ecosystem, which is decomposition. So the breakdown of dead plant material and the release back to the atmosphere of CO2. And that process is very poorly understood from a chemical perspective, but also biologically, which organisms are involved, how they interact with each other. When I started research there, it was very poorly understood. So I became interested in fungi as kind of like engines, like chemical engines of carbon movement through ecosystems. And I became interested in mycorrhizal fungi because mycorrhizal fungi, they attach to live plant roots. So they're a little bit different than decomposers. They will take sugar directly from the plant as it's photosynthesizing it. It will take sugars, and in exchange, the mycorrhizal fungus will extend out into soil. It will absorb other nutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, calcium, potassium, and water and give it to the plant in exchange. So there's this beautiful kind of mutualism between the fungus and the plant. However, I realized through reading about these fungi that they had evolved from decomposers. So they retained a lot of the capacity to break down dead organic matter in soils, dead plant material. And that means that the decay of soil on Earth and its release back to the atmosphere as CO2, as these fungi breathe, it's dependent on fungi and how they are functioning, but it's also dependent on the plant the fungus is attached to. And so I wrote a number of papers about this, sort of trying to alert the ecological community to the fact that we are kind of ignoring this important role of mycorrhizal fungi in moving carbon within the ecosystem and nutrients and other things. So I became very interested in them from that kind of chemical perspective.
Even though mycorrhizal fungi can increase plant tolerance to abiotic stresses associated with climate changes, they too are feeling the effects of climate change. And scientists like Jennifer are already seeing some hints of it.
There's some new estimates that just one type of mycorrhizal fungi, arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, which are the dominant type of mycorrhizal fungi in the world, they store about a third of annual carbon dioxide emissions by humans every year in their own biomass. So it's a very large pool of carbon in soil that is locked within the biomass of these fungi. And that's probably an underestimate because it's just one type of mycorrhizal fungi. But anyway, to answer your question, so there's really variable effects of warming on these fungi, and we're still trying to understand it. But one thing we have observed pretty consistently is that warming tends to promote the growth of some decomposer fungi. So these are free living fungi. They don't live on plant roots, but they break down, like, for example, wood. They break down like plant sugars and wood. And so with warming, these fungi tend to increase their activity. They decompose more sugar biomass that's dead and like laying on the forest floor, for example, and they will release it as CO2. So we see a pulse of CO2 coming out of these systems as they've warmed, at least initially. Over time, long-term warming studies have shown that those fungi tend to reduce activity. Once most of the sugar in the soil has been burnt off, they kind of die down again. And then other fungi start decomposing deeper and older soil carbon, which is much more of a concern, and releasing that to the atmosphere, CO2. So we're still watching that to see how that changes over time. But for mycorrhizal fungi, it appears to be quite dependent on moisture availability. So when you have warming, some taxa do better, some taxa do worse, depending on their optimal growth temperature. But if you have severe drying, like you do in some arid ecosystems, for example, the Mediterranean, like France and Italy, we see a decline in mycorrhizal, ectomycorrhizal fungi that, for example, live on oak trees and make truffles. And that's a concern. We've seen a decline in those over time. That's a concern because these fungi help plants live by giving them nutrients, but they also often confer stress tolerance to plants. They can help them tolerate drought, heat, pathogens, things like that. And so if those fungi go away, these plants are more vulnerable.
So this might have got you thinking, can such fungi be restored into forests, just like how trees are replanted?
There's very, very good evidence from scientific studies of forest restoration that you can add these fungi back into an ecosystem and they can establish and help the forest regrow. And where the science is on that now is that we are trying to understand the most efficient and sustainable way to bring those fungi back in. So people are trying all different methods. They're bringing in whole pieces of soil from maybe a natural old growth forest to kind of inoculate a new forest that's growing. You can get fungal spores out of soil and concentrate them and add them that way. We collect mushrooms and we get spores out of mushrooms, and we use that. So people are trying all sorts of combinations of methods to return these fungi to degraded lands. And there's very, very good evidence that many of those methods are quite successful. It's a really good question. It's my main question right now. So we are doing more and more work in cities because these fungi do not thrive in cities. But there's a lot of city greening going on. So there's a lot of opportunity to try and reintroduce them.
But as you may imagine, restoring fungi back into natural ecosystems is a huge uphill task that requires many layers of trial and error, especially in our growing concrete jungles.
So, the city of Boston, for example, has just started trying to reintroduce these fungi to their trees in 2023. And so we're watching to see if it has an effect, if it increases growth, and if it makes these trees healthier, because trees often die very rapidly in cities. They can grow quickly, but they can die quickly too. And so we're wondering if by bringing these fungi back into the city, we're able to help with tree survival. Now, I think it will be complex because in general, as a group, they don't thrive in cities. So we're trying to find the right species to bring in that we find locally in the region. So we're not introducing foreign species, but also species that can tolerate the very harsh conditions of the city. We have very hot conditions in cities. The heat island effect of cities underground is very strong. In Boston, we have a lot of drought in cities. It might be different in different parts of the world. You might have more or less moisture in cities underground, a lot of pollution, things like that. So we're actively looking for species that can tolerate those conditions.
This alliance between fungi and plants goes back almost 500 million years, but they don't just benefit trees and forests. From providing us food in the form of mushrooms to being hidden warriors of climate change, the humble fungi is literally everywhere. In fact, fungi are often described as being the fifth kingdom of life on Earth. They are neither plant nor animal, microbe nor protozoa. And scientists like Jennifer are in a race against time to find out more about this mysterious empire to make sure we don't lose them all.
Fungi are everywhere. They are all over you right now. They're all over the room where you're sitting. There are many millions of species of fungi on Earth. I think the current estimate is about 3.8 million species, and that's probably an underestimate. So they're quite diverse, from breaking down waste to providing nutrients like nitrogen to plants to help plants grow. They can act in animals, so helping them tolerate stressors. They can also be pathogens of plants and animals, so cause disease. So they're important regulators of population density and biodiversity on Earth. They store carbon in their biomass in soils. They create stability in soil, and they create actual habitat for other microorganisms to live. They're a food source for many microorganisms and animals, so they do all sorts of things. And in particular, they're very important for kind of regulating the amount of carbon and other elements that are stored on land versus released to the atmosphere as greenhouse gas. So they breathe just like we do, and there are so many of them that they can control the amount of carbon dioxide that's released to the atmosphere on a landscape level. So actually the largest organism on Earth by surface area is a fungus. It's an Armillaria species. It's a root pathogen and a decomposer, and it lives on conifer trees in Oregon, and it spans the length of over 1,600 football fields and weighs over 600 tons, so they can be quite large, even though they're microorganisms. Yeah, there's fungi that can break down every single man-made material, rubber, plastic, concrete. There are fungi that are growing on the nuclear reactor core in Chernobyl, and they're using the decay of uranium to build biomass in their cells. So fungi can kind of do just about anything. So if we lost fungi altogether, we would all be covered in trash, and most of the other biological processes on Earth would stop. So they're really, really important for keeping things going on Earth the way that we're used to them. I know, that's kind of worst case scenario, right? But one thing I will say about these fungi is that they evolve quickly. We have evidence that they can evolve in response to climate change within a couple of years. So, there's still a lot of promise and potential and opportunity to work with fungi to kind of mitigate climate change, to solve some of our environmental problems.
That was Climate Connections on Money FM 89.3.
To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.